Taehyung didn't go back to his room. He couldn't. His heart was racing, his hands unsteady as he leaned against a wall just outside Jungkook's door, struggling to catch his breath. He almost kissed him. The realization made his stomach churn with panic and something far more dangerous, want. Taehyung squeezed his eyes shut. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that Jungkook was his past. That moving on was the only option. That what they had before was a mistake. Then why, after all this time, did his body still remember him? Why did he feel like a drowning man every time Jungkook looked at him like that? Like he was something precious, something Jungkook would wait a lifetime for? He gritted his teeth and pushed himself off the wall. He needed to get out of here. With shaky steps, Taehyung made his way toward the front door. The night air was cold when he stepped outside, wrapping around him like a warning. He should leave. He should run. But instead, he found himself sitting on the front steps, burying his face in his hands. Because no matter how far he ran, Jungkook was still inside him. Still in the way his heart ached, still in the way his skin burned at the ghost of his touch. Still in the way he wanted to turn back, walk straight into that room, and finally give in. But Taehyung wasn't sure if he knew how to be loved by Jungkook anymore. He had spent too long being without him. And yet, the sound of footsteps made him tense. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. Jungkook. Taehyung sucked in a breath, but he didn't move when Jungkook lowered himself onto the step beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "I thought you left," Jungkook murmured. Taehyung let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I thought so too." Jungkook didn't push for more. He just sat there, close enough that their knees almost touched. Close enough that Taehyung could feel the warmth of his body against the cold night air. "Do you ever get tired?" Taehyung asked suddenly. Jungkook frowned. "Of what? Of waiting for me?" Jungkook was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "No." Taehyung's fingers curled into his sleeves. "Why?" Jungkook exhaled, his voice steady but full of something deep. "Because you're the only thing I've ever been sure of." Taehyung froze. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure Jungkook could hear it. For the first time in a long while, he wanted to believe him. But could he? Could he really allow himself to hope? Taehyung didn't know how long they sat there. The quiet between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words that neither of them dared to voice. Jungkook had always been patient, always waiting for Taehyung to find his own way back to him. But tonight, Taehyung could feel the weight of everything pressing down on his chest. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he had the strength to keep running. He turned his head slightly, stealing a glance at Jungkook. The younger man was staring ahead, his expression unreadable. But his fingers, those damn fingers, were gripping his own knees tightly, like he was holding himself back. Taehyung swallowed. "Do you still love me?" The words left his lips before he could stop them. Jungkook stiffened. Then, slowly, he turned to face him. His gaze was devastating. "Do you even have to ask?" Taehyung felt his breath hitch. Because Jungkook wasn't just looking at him. He was seeing him, every broken part, every scar, every doubt. And still, there was no hesitation. No wavering. Just the same, relentless love that had never once faded. Taehyung clenched his jaw, his fingers digging into his sleeves. He wanted to believe it. He needed to. But, "I'm scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Jungkook exhaled softly, his gaze gentle but unwavering. I know. Taehyung squeezed his eyes shut. What if we, his voice broke. What if I can't do this again? Jungkook was silent for a moment. Then we figure it out. Together. Taehyung's chest tightened painfully. Taehyung, Jungkook continued, his voice steady but achingly soft. I'm not asking you to be sure. I'm not asking you to be ready. He hesitated, then reached out, his fingers brushing against Taehyung's hand. I just want you to try. Taehyung's breath caught. The warmth of Jungkook's skin against his own sent a shiver down his spine. It was so easy to let himself fall. And that terrified him more than anything else. But as he sat there, staring into the eyes of the man who had never once let go of him, for the first time in 5 years, Taehyung wondered, maybe he didn't have to be alone anymore. Maybe. Just maybe. It was time to stop running. Taehyung had never felt this afraid before. Not when he first left. Not when he spent years convincing himself that he was doing the right thing. But sitting here, with Jungkook's warmth seeping into his skin, with the weight of his own unspoken feelings pressing down on his chest, this was terrifying. Because this wasn't running. This was standing still. This was facing it. He looked down at Jungkook's hand, still lightly brushing against his. He could pull away. He could say something cruel, something to push Jungkook back like he always did. But this time, he didn't want to. So instead, he let his fingers twitch, just slightly, against Jungkook's. It wasn't much. But Jungkook's breath hitched anyway. The silence between them stretched, thick with something fragile, something achingly tender. Jungkook swallowed, his voice softer than Taehyung had ever heard it. Or is this you trying? Taehyung's throat tightened. He wanted to say yes. But the words wouldn't come out. So instead, he simply gave the smallest nod. And it was enough. Because Jungkook, who had been waiting for so long, breathed out shakily, like the weight of the world had just been lifted from his shoulders. Like this tiny, hesitant, messy step meant everything. Taehyung could feel his heart pounding against his ribs. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't certainty. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. Jungkook didn't move. Didn't breathe. He was afraid that if he did, Taehyung would pull away, that this moment, this small but monumental step, would slip through his fingers like everything else had before. But Taehyung didn't pull away. Didn't take back the way his fingers had twitched against Jungkook's. Didn't retreat behind the walls he always built. He just sat there, staring, as if he, too, didn't quite believe what had just happened. And Jungkook ached. Because Taehyung didn't even realize what this meant to him. Didn't realize how long Jungkook had been waiting, hoping, for even the smallest hint that Taehyung still felt something, still wanted him, even if he didn't know how to say it. Jungkook swallowed, fingers curling slightly where they rested against the table. You don't have to rush, he murmured. Taehyung blinked, eyes flickering up to his. Jungkook forced himself to smile, gentle, patient, even as his heart pounded wildly in his chest. I mean it, he said, voice softer now. I'll wait. Taehyung inhaled, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then, slowly, his lips parted. You keep saying that. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. Jungkook nodded. Because it's true, Taehyung exhaled shakily, fingers flexing against his lap. Jungkook watched the hesitation in his movements, the battle in his eyes. And then, in the smallest, most hesitant motion, Taehyung turned his hand over, just slightly, just enough for Jungkook's fingers to brush his palm. Jungkook's breath caught. It wasn't a full hold. It wasn't an embrace. But it was more than Taehyung had ever given him before. And right now, in this quiet space between them, it felt like the most precious thing in the world. Jungkook's throat tightened. "Okay," he murmured, barely able to find his voice. Taehyung still didn't look at him. But he didn't move away, either. And for now, that was enough. Taehyung didn't know how long they sat there like that, his palm barely touching Jungkook's, his heart thudding heavily in his chest. It was such a small thing. Barely a touch. And yet, it felt like his entire body was betraying him, like every defense he had carefully built over the past 5 years was crumbling with just a brush of fingers. Jungkook hadn't moved. Hadn't even breathed too deeply, as if he was afraid any sudden motion would make Taehyung pull away. And maybe, just maybe, he was right to be afraid. Because Taehyung was terrified. Of this. Of himself. Of what it meant that he had reached out first. Jungkook had always been steady. Constant. The only one who had ever made Taehyung feel safe in the storm of his own emotions. And yet, that same steadiness was what scared him the most. Because what if it wasn't real? What if, after all these years, Jungkook thought he still loved him, but really, he was just clinging to something that no longer existed? What if Taehyung let himself believe, and it turned out to be a mistake? The fear lodged itself deep in his chest, suffocating. His fingers twitched, an instinct to pull away. To retreat. But before he could move, Jungkook's voice broke through the silence. "You're scared," Jungkook murmured, and it wasn't a question. Taehyung hated how easily Jungkook still read him. He swallowed, keeping his gaze down. "I never said that," Jungkook hummed softly. "You don't have to." Taehyung's jaw clenched. For a moment, he thought about denying it. Thought about lying. But lying to Jungkook had never been easy. So instead, he exhaled sharply and muttered, "Of course I'm scared." Jungkook's fingers flexed against the table, but he didn't pull away. "Of me?" Taehyung hesitated. "No," he admitted. Then, quieter, "of what you make me feel." Jungkook's breath hitched, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. Taehyung still refused to look at him, but he felt the shift in the air, the way the weight of his words settled between them. "I don't want to hurt again," Taehyung whispered. Jungkook's voice was hoarse when he finally responded. "Then let me make sure you don't." Taehyung finally looked up, and the sincerity in Jungkook's gaze broke something inside him. Because for the first time in years, Taehyung wanted to believe him. He wanted to trust that Jungkook wouldn't leave again. And that was the scariest thing of all.